Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of the day it is you are joining us for this special Tulsa World Scene podcast. If we could have some, theme music with, breaking news or whatever, we would include it, but we don't have it, so we'll just keep going. The reason for this is my friend and colleague Jimmie Tramel has seen Killers of the Flower Moon and also got the chance to talk briefly with the director Martin Scorsese. So as one of the lucky people who've seen the movie before it officially opens, uh, other than it was 3 hours and 26 minutes, what was your thoughts about Killers of the Flower Moon, knowing the book and all?
A couple of takeaways as I left the theater. One was just that sadness. It's a very sad film, and obviously it's based on real life, so you'd expect it to be a sad story. I guess the flip side of just being such a sad film is you're glad this story is finally being told to the world because if not for David Grant's book and this movie, I would not know about this subject, and so would who knows how many other people. And the other takeaway is just that as you mentioned, the length of the film is 3.5 hours. After seeing it, I didn't think that was a negative. I thought it was a positive that the story is told over 3.5 hours to allow you to get full context of all the dominoes that fell during the course of this movie. And in fact, when it finally gets to being, it's a romance, it's a crime story, it's a courtroom drama. And I thought by the time it becomes a courtroom drama, it could have been even longer because the courtroom aspect of it is kind of hurried. So not only are the 3.5 hours justified, in my opinion, could have been longer.
Mhm. And what you mentioned about it being a sad story, and this is something that I believe your story from your interview with Martin Scorsese points out, is that this is also for the Osage Nation an ongoing story. They're
Yes.
still feeling the repercussions of this basically attack on them, and as we've pointed out in other stories, you have descendants of the victims still living next door, relatively speaking, to the descendants of those who are responsible for these crimes. And it's that's something that I think a lot of people have trouble kind of getting their heads around. Just because the book comes to an end, because the movie comes to an end, that doesn't mean that the story comes to an end.
Yeah, I can't imagine being the descendants of these people who were murdered, some in very savage fashion, uh, and seeing these things portrayed on screen of your ancestors. So that it has to be heartbreaking for these people to go into a theater and see these things unfold.
The the movie places at the center of it the you mentioned the love story between, and that's the romance between uh Ernest and Molly Burkhart, played by uh Lily Goetz, Gladstone, and Leonardo DiCaprio. um does the fact that you have this romance and then this, I guess, betrayal going on, does that intensify the story for you in a way that you realize that how personal a story this was?
Yeah, personal is exactly the right word. By choosing to focus on Ernest and Molly and their marriage, you put faces on this tragedy. It's one thing to read about a tragedy that happened 100 years ago. It's another thing for that tragedy to have a face or faces. So it seemed like it was exactly the right way to go. And I know one thing they did not want was it to be the flip side of this, where, oh, gee, here comes the quote unquote white savior to save the day. It's not that story. It's a different story.
Okay, all right. As uh, just just as a movie, uh, uh, how well made is it? I know that Scorsese, puts a high quality product out, but for you as just as a moviegoer, a little bit about the experience of just watching the movie and what they accomplished.
I think it's really well done. I mean, I've heard of people, call it an epic and speak in glowing terms of the film and the performances of the performances. My opinion, and granted, I'm not the chef, but I can tell you if the food tastes good. Just my opinion. I think of the primary actors, the one who stands the best chance of winning hardware, winning awards, trophies, might be De Niro, just because his character is just so friggin' evil. Uh, and obviously that gives you a lot to sink your teeth into as an actor when you portray somebody, uh, you know, maybe complex, but also very evil.
And now I know that Lily Gladstone has made she has has had a career before this, but this is very much her first major carry the film kind of a role. How does she, as a relatively inexperienced actress, and that sounds pejorative, but I don't mean it that way. I mean, so for somebody who gets people as well known and as admired as De Niro and DiCaprio, how does she stand up to them?
They had to find the right Molly, and she is. You feel for her as she loses her family members one by one, and essentially she is alone except for this husband she may or may not be able to trust. So she's really fantastic. I'd be surprised if she does not get nominated for awards, but they had to find the right Molly to carry the day, and Scorsese relied on her for some improv that shows up in a couple of scenes in the film. So just a great job.
Okay. Well, are there any moments in the film that you, as an Oklahoman, kind of jarred you seeing? Were there things where things got a little anachronistic, or you see something that, well, no, that shouldn't be there?
Not really. I mean, I watch Reservation Dogs, and I see some spots in Reservation Dogs, and I go, I know this place or that place, but it's a different sense because that's kind of a joyful series, and at times there is some sad moments in Reservation Dogs. But this, I was mainly looking for the spots of Pawhuska that I knew were transformed to be 1920s Fairfax, a train station, the downtown area with the dirt roads. And viewers will feel like they're in 1920s Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, as we say, we have a story. I believe it appears in Tuesdays, or it will be in Tuesday's paper.
It's in this. It was in the Tuesday paper. You're correct. Sorry.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience? Obviously the Tulsa World did not send you to the New York premiere, but tell me a little bit about how that came about and were there some things that came out of that you weren't able to get into the story?
Scorsese was offered to the media for a global and virtual press conference, essentially a Zoom, except you're seeing him. He doesn't have to see me, which is great for him. And all the invited media were given the opportunity to submit 3 questions maximum for consideration that he would answer, whether it was he that chose the questions to answer or the moderator. He did spend 26 minutes on the Zoom call and got around to answering about 6 questions. So it was 6 questions.
Any of them yours?
None were mine. I
okay.
chewed on the ones I wanted to ask, submitted those, but unfortunately, I did not win the Martin jackpot on this deal.
Okay. Well, one of the things you do quote him talking about is about the Oklahoma landscape and how important that was to the success of telling this story. he makes some comment about realizing that the landscape, while beautiful, also has a sinister quality to it. Have you ever felt that way about wide open spaces in Osage County being kind of sinister in a way?
That was new for me, but his introduction to Oklahoma is different than mine. I mean, I'm used to wide open spaces, meaning wide open spaces, and do what you will. But it was interesting to hear his standpoint that, yeah, it's great that this is you see this expanse and there's so much wide open territory, all these prairies, but you also are so far away from other people, you can get away with anything you want to get away with, which is what happened 100 years ago. He did say something, I don't know if he was joking or not. He said, growing up in New York, it's different than growing up in Oklahoma. He said he didn't realize the sunset in the west until he was driving down Sunset Boulevard and saw the sun setting in the west and put two and two together, like, oh, Sunset Boulevard, I see the sunset. He had to be joking about this, correct? I mean, he can't really know when the sun will set in the west.
I will, well, it may not have registered, but I understand that, that feeling. Back in, well, it was about 20 years ago, I spent 2 weeks in New York City, and I remember calling my wife at the end of the first week and saying, I understand why I know I could never live in New York City, is I can't see the sky.
Yeah.
You live out here in Oklahoma. I mean, I'm looking out the window at, a gigantic expanse of sky in the back of several fast food restaurants, but we won't go there. And it was true. And he grew up in
Lower East Side.
Lower East Side, yeah, New York City. And you don't see the sky. You see slivers.
I had the same experience. I was covering a sporting event out there many years ago, and we stayed at the Meadowlands in New Jersey. And we thought, hey, let's all go to New York City the next day. And hey, the sun was out. I dressed like no jacket, just a short sleeve shirt. Then I get into New York City, and obviously you're not seeing the sun. You're in the shade all the time. And I froze my butt off and bought a jacket because you're just in the shade all the time.
Exactly. And I can't walk fast anyway, but I couldn't live in New York City because everybody would be running over me because people move fast in that place, and not just in the streets. So it's yeah, I can understand that sense of being overwhelmed by the sky in Osage County and the prairies. So okay. Was there a question that you submitted that you wished he had asked?
I'm fortunate, and I am fortunate in the fact that I can remember all three questions I submitted. I can't remember oftentimes what I had for dinner last night, but I can remember some stuff. I submitted, what do you want the takeaway for people to be for the film? I submitted, it's one thing to read about the Osage in David Grant's book, but an altogether different thing to meet them and see them and work with them. And I wonder if your perception of the Osage has changed since you made the movie. And then the third question was, and this is the one I would have most liked him to answer, was with such a sad film and sad subject matter, and I thought about this during the movie even, how do you come up with a conclusion to the film that is satisfying to moviegoers and satisfying to the filmmaker? Because as I said, it's just so sad. What's the conclusion here that you walk away with? It's your parting shot of the movie. And they do get very, very creative and how they wrap up this movie. I don't want to spoil that. People can see for themselves, but it's very different how this movie wraps up.
And as you're going to say, satisfying to the moviegoer, satisfying to the filmmaker, but also faithful to the spirit of the people that are being represented in this story, and whose story this is. So, well, that's, I think, all the questions I have for you. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that we need to, or do you have more Killers of the Flower Moon stories coming out anytime soon? Or
I will have one reactions story based on I will go to the theater on Thursday, and I will catch people walking out of the cinema and ask them what their reactions are, because we all have different reactions. So I'm looking forward to see what people have to say about it.
Okay. All right. Well, we want to thank you all for listening to us for this very special edition of the Tulsa World Scene podcast. And keep reading, pardon me, keep reading the Tulsa World, either online at tulsaworld.com or in the physical paper that you can pick up at fine newsstands everywhere. I want to thank you all again for listening, and we bid you a pleasant good day.